The 2023 college football season is underway, and it is shaping up to be one of the best and most exciting seasons of college football that we have seen in a long time. In this video, I'm going to be discussing what makes this season so special and why it has the potential to be so exciting. College football is back, and I know I'm more excited than I've ever been about a season in my life, and I'm sure many of you are too. As we approach week 1, the hype keeps on building, and with everything that has happened this offseason with NIL, the transfer portal, and conference realignment, this season is primed to be a great one. Now, this 2023 season isn't just your ordinary college football season. To start things off, we have the Georgia Bulldogs coming off back-to-back national championships and one of the most dominant seasons in recent history last year in 2022. Georgia is not satisfied yet. They're going to be looking to three-peat this year, and no team has done this since Minnesota all the way back in 1934, 35, and 36. Now, to me, one of the most intriguing things about this season is there's no one clear dominant team or teams that I would pick to win the national championship. I guess you would have to say it's Georgia because they've just been the top dog the past 2 years and no one else has been able to really compete with them. Back in the late 2010s, it seemed like it was always Alabama and Clemson competing for the national championship, and then of course there was that iconic LSU team in 2020 that went 15-0. And don't get me wrong, there's a ton of teams this year that could be really good and have the potential to do great things. But to me, it's not just one or two teams that stand out and say, oh yeah, they're definitely going to make the playoff and they're definitely going to win the national championship. No one's even going to be on their level. That's been Georgia the past 2 years, and after losing some key pieces from that defense and Stenson Bennett, we'll see if they'll be able to make it 3 in a row. But aside from Georgia, there's a variety of teams that have the potential to be really good and could take their programs to new heights they've never been before. But at the same time, those teams could also not live up to their expectations and let their fans down, which just goes to prove my point of how there isn't really one clear dominant team or teams this year that I would pick to win the national championship, which makes it so exciting because you're going to have all these teams competing and fighting for those 4 playoff spots. And when it gets to the end of November and into playoff season and championship time, I cannot wait to watch those games. Now let's start with the Georgia Bulldogs, because if I had to pick a team that would make the playoff and win the national championship, it would most likely be them. Now, a main obvious reason for this is because of Kirby Smart and the dominance that they have observed over the past 2 years. But another reason is simply just because of their schedule this year. Georgia has probably one of, if not the easiest schedules in college football this year, which is an absolute joke considering they just won back-to-back national championships. To start things off, they only have 4 true road games. Now, the game against Florida would make it 5, but that game's always at a neutral site, so they really only have 4 true road games. And their biggest game of the year is going to be at Tennessee, most likely. And leading up to this game, they will have only had 2 true road games. 2 road games at Auburn and at Vanderbilt. And Auburn can always be a hostile environment, but I would not expect Georgia to lose that game. So leading up to their biggest game of the year, they'll really only have 2 road games, and that's at November 18th. That is like the end of the season. Georgia only has had 2 true road games by that point. So to give the back-to-back national champions that easy of a schedule, I just think is kind of funny, to be honest, and that's why I'm saying nobody's going to beat Georgia. They're going to make it to the SEC championship, and even if they make it to the SEC championship 12-0 and still lose, they'll still be in the college football playoff. So I just honestly don't see how Georgia doesn't make it to the national championship this year. Now, before we discuss anything else, let's just take a look at the odds to win the college football national championship in 2023. So Georgia opens as the clear favorite as plus 225, and then it's a pretty decent gap between the next team, which is Alabama, at plus 600. This again just emphasizes what I was talking about of how Georgia is obviously the top dog, but then below them you have a variety of teams that are really competing and that could have true potential and make the college football playoff and compete for that national championship. Now, obviously the next most popular team this year is probably going to be Alabama in the SEC, but they just don't have the strength that they've had in the recent years at positions like wide receiver and quarterback. They've been having quarterback battles all offseason, and then after their spring game they had to bring in Tyler Buckner from Notre Dame, which could just signify they're having some issues at that position. Again, not sure that's what that means, but they've just been lacking in elite players at those important positions like they've had in the past, like last year with Bryce Young. Bryce Young carried that Alabama team last year. If it's not for him, they would have lost to Texas, probably Florida, Ole Miss maybe, and all those other games that they easily could have lost if it wasn't for him. Because of this, I think it's just really tough to say that Alabama can be good enough to win the SEC and beat Georgia for a national championship, which again, I think it just leaves the playing field wide open. Now, another important team to talk about this year that has a lot of hype is LSU. And like I said earlier, LSU is one of those teams that has a lot of hype and potential surrounding them, and they could easily do really good, but at the same time, they could be a 9-3 team, 8-4, and not even sniff the college football playoff. And another important factor of making the playoff is probably the most important factor is your record. And to have a good record, you need to have a fairly favorable schedule. The tougher your schedule is, the more difficult it is to have that good record. And LSU's schedule is not the easiest schedule in the world. They open at Florida State. I think that could be a very tough game. On the road in a hostile environment against a Florida State team that also has a lot of hype around them. It could be great. Then later on, they have to go to Ole Miss. That could definitely be a very challenging game. Then they also have to go to Tuscaloosa to play Alabama. That's going to be extremely difficult for them. And then at the end of the year, they close with Texas A&M at home. Now that's at home. Probably won't be that big of a worry, but you never know. So that's 4 games I just talked about right there that could be really dangerous for them. So again, like, they could do amazing and live up to that hype and win all 4 of those games. Go to the SEC championship, face Georgia, and then go on from there. But at the same time, they could lose every single one of those games. Go 8-4 and not even stay at the college football playoff. And there's so many teams like that this year that could be insane and reach new heights, but at the same time, they could just really disappoint. And to me, that just makes this season so much fun that I cannot wait to watch it. Before we leave the SEC, we need to talk about Tennessee, because Tennessee is coming off one of the best seasons in program history last year after beating Alabama and coming off that impressive Orange Bowl win against Clemson. Now, obviously, they lost some huge key pieces from their team last year to the draft in Jalen Hyatt and Hendon Hooker, and Joe Milton is going to have some huge shoes to fill this year. He's one of those Heisman candidate players that could be amazing, live up to the hype, potentially win the Heisman, but if he doesn't perform to those standards, he could really let his team down, and they could suffer because of that. Their schedule isn't too difficult, which helps them out, but their 2 toughest games are by far going to be at Alabama and at home versus Georgia. I really just don't see them winning either of those games, and unfortunately, that's going to leave them out of the college football playoff, most likely, with 2 losses. Who knows? Maybe they prove me wrong. Maybe they do split those games, or maybe they win both and prove us all wrong and go 12-0. But again, Tennessee is just one of those teams that, they could do great, but I think it's just going to be really difficult for them to live up to that standard that they set last year. Now let's move away from the SEC and start to shift the focus towards the ACC, because there are 2 teams in the ACC that have the potential to be elite and could really make a push for the college football playoff. Most of you probably know who I'm talking about, and that is going to be Clemson and Florida State. Past 2 years, Clemson has not lived up to their usual standard of making the college football playoff and even competing for a national championship. Last year, not a bad season in any means. They went 10-2, won the ACC, and then lost to Tennessee in the Orange Bowl. Year before that, they finished 9-3 in the regular season and capped it off with a win against Iowa State in the Cheez-It Bowl. Things are starting to get back on track for the Tigers after winning the ACC championship last year. DJ Uyunglele is now transferred out of the program, and 5-star quarterback Cade Klubnik is now taking the wheel, so we'll see what he can do. And if he performs good and lives up to the hype, I think Clemson could definitely get back to that level of being in a college football playoff. Now, another team with a lot of hype this year is Florida State, and to me, Florida State is one of those teams that could live up to that hype and perform at an elite level and make a push for the college football playoff, but at the same time, they have a really tough schedule and could lose some of those big games and find themselves 8-4, 9-3, and not even touching the college football playoff. So I think they're going to be one of those interesting teams to see how it pans out. Now, Florida State has a lot of hype surrounding them, like I just mentioned, and rightfully so. They have one of the Heisman frontrunners in Jordan Travis, and he is expected to do great things. One of the best defensive tackles in the game in Jerry Verse, so they definitely have the pieces to have a special season. But at the same time, like I said, it's going to be a very difficult year for them. They have a really tough schedule in my opinion, so it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out. They open the year against LSU. Again, that game could go either way. Definitely helps that it's at home, but it's still the very first game of the season, so might not have everything figured out. That game, in my opinion, could go either way. I honestly don't know who could win that game. Then just 3 games later, in the 4th game of the season, they traveled to Clemson, and I think that will be a very tough game for them. I do not see them winning that game. So there are 2 big potential games that they could lose right there, and then assuming they make it to the ACC championship game, which a lot of people have them making, they would most likely play Clemson again, and that's another 3rd game they could lose. So there are 3 games they could lose right there, and those are just the biggest games, assuming they beat all the teams they're supposed to beat. So now we're going to move on to the Big Ten, and I think the Big Ten will probably be the most competitive conference this year. Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State are by far the best 3 teams in that conference, and it's not even close. Michigan, obviously the frontrunner, coming off back-to-back Big Ten championships, back-to-back years of beating Ohio State. Ohio State trying to get back to that level of being the top dog, and Penn State just trying to sneak in there. They're always just 1 win away or a couple wins away from getting to Indianapolis and making the college football playoff. So I think this will be a very competitive conference. You look at a team like Penn State, 5-star quarterback Drew Aller, star running backs Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, great pieces on the defensive end, Abdul Carter, Kalen King, those guys are all preseason All-Americans. And you look at their schedule, it's not too difficult. Obviously the two biggest games are Ohio State and Michigan. You have Michigan at home late in the year. That could be a huge push for them. They go to Ohio State. That'll be very tough. And even if they end up losing that game, they still got Michigan at home. So I think if Penn State could find a way to split those two, they could find themselves in the college football playoff. And they look at Ohio State. People have Ohio State really high this year. And for right reasons. They have the best receiving core in the country. It's not even close. Marvin Harrison Jr., the best player in college football. He's a freak. Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, there's just no debate. Now the quarterback situation to me is interesting. We've never seen Kyle McCord really play in a real game, so I think it'll be interesting to see how he does. Again, those receivers will help him out a ton, so it really doesn't have too much pressure on him. We'll see how Travion Henderson can bounce back from his injury, and we'll see how their defense does. They have a very promising defensive line, but their schedule can be tough. Their schedule, if you really look at it, is not that easy. One of the first games of the season, they have to go to Notre Dame. They handled them just fine last year, but going to Notre Dame is another team that, a lot of hype surrounding them. Just had that huge win over Navy in Ireland. That could be a tough game. Like I mentioned earlier, they have Penn State at home. That's always a competitive game. They have to go to Michigan, to the big house, and I think Michigan's going to three-peat personally. That's going to be another tough game for them. And then another sneaky game in the middle of the season is at Wisconsin. Wisconsin, Luke Fickell, new head coach, Braylon Allen, one of the best running backs in college football. I think that could be a really sneaky game for him. So, to me, Ohio State's schedule is not the easiest. Now you look at Michigan, I think they're probably the favorite to win the Big Ten. Again, they have Ohio State at home, a pretty easy schedule aside from that, except for that Penn State game. I think that'll be a huge game. So to me, I honestly don't know who's going to win the Big Ten. Probably Michigan's the best guess, but I wouldn't be surprised if Penn State does. And we'll see what Ohio State does. But again, the Big Ten, I think it's going to be super competitive. Can't wait to watch how it plays out. Another team that's important to take note of here is Texas. Texas is, again, one of those teams that has that huge potential this year, and they have the expectation that they can make it to the college football playoff. And they have the players to do so. They have a great quarterback in Quinn Ewers, star receiver in Xavier Worthy, and a very solid defense. So again, Texas is one of those teams that could win their conference and make it to the college football playoff. And it just adds on that list of teams like Florida State, LSU, and Penn State, where they could do so good, but at the same time, they could not even sniff the playoff. And to me, there being a variety of teams all in this same boat of competing for that top spot next to Georgia make this season so awesome. Now, the last thing we need to talk about in this video is the Pac-12, because the Pac-12 might be the most stacked conference this year, which is kind of ironic considering the fact that this is basically the last year of the conference as all the teams are leaving next year. But for this year, they have 5 teams in the top 25, and we'll start with the highest ranked team in USC. Obviously, the biggest name out of USC this year is Caleb Williams, trying to win back-to-back Heisman trophies. No one's done this since Archie Griffin in the 80s, by the way. But I cannot wait to watch him play this year. Watching him play is just amazing, and I think he's going to be able to do great things for USC. But the big concern for USC has always been their defense, and that's really what held them up last year. If their defense is the same as last year, it's going to really hurt them, but I know they've added some additions, and they've got some really good recruits coming in, and they do definitely have the talent. So if they're able to put their defense together, I can see USC being a playoff team, but if they can't get that defense figured out, it's going to be rough for them, I think. The next team in the Pac-12 is Washington, coming in at number 10 in the preseason rankings, and a lot of people are really high on Washington this year, and I think they could be a great team. They got Michael Penix coming back. He's considered to be a Heisman favorite this year, along with star wide receiver Rome Odunze. So I think Washington could definitely make some noise and have a great season. The next Pac-12 team on this list is Utah, coming in at number 14 in the preseason rankings, and Utah has been very impressive the last 2 years. Back-to-back Pac-12 champions, back-to-back Rose Bowl appearances, and they've just been a really solid football team. And they returned their quarterback Cam Rising and some other key pieces to that team, so I think Utah, once again, could be primed for a good year. Now, obviously, Cam Rising's health is a huge factor, and the competition level and talent level in the Pac-12 this year is insanely high, so I don't know if they'll be able to win the Pac-12 again, but we'll see. But I think Utah could definitely make some noise this year. The next team we need to talk about is Oregon, coming in right behind Utah at 15. Obviously, the biggest name associated with Oregon, Bo Nix. Second season at Oregon after transferring over from Auburn. Had a great year last year. Now a year in the system, a little more comfortable, a little more experience in the Pac-12. Can he elevate? Can he take Oregon to that next level? Can he get them to the Pac-12 championship and the college football playoff? We'll see. Everything pretty much rests on the shoulders of Bo Nix and Eugene, Oregon. So we'll see what he can do and if he can take them to the promised land. Now, the last team we're going to talk about in the Pac-12, maybe not as highly rated as those 4 teams, but still a very solid, underrated program, is Oregon State. Oregon State comes in at number 18 in the preseason rankings and capped off their season last year with a win over Oregon and a win over the Florida Gators in the Las Vegas Bowl to finish with a record of 10-3. Their biggest move this offseason was acquiring quarterback DJ Uyunglele from Clemson with the transfer portal, so look out for Oregon State to make some big moves this year. Now, these were a lot of teams just coming from one conference, so there's a ton of competition in the Pac-12, and this competition could rise to the occasion, and they could send 1 or even 2 teams to the college football playoff. But at the same time, it could get so tough that all these teams finish like 10-2 or 9-3, and then no one makes the college football playoff, which just adds to the excitement level of college football this year. That pretty much covers the big name teams and everything about why this season is going to be so special. And now we could go into all the conference realignment and NIL stuff, but that's another topic for a whole nother video. The last thing I want to touch upon here is the Heisman Trophy, because to me the race this year is extremely competitive. Obviously, Caleb Williams is the front runner trying to win back-to-back, but you got players like Michael Penix, Drake May, Jordan Travis, Bo Nix, and of course Marvin Harrison Jr. trying to make some noise and put their name out there, asserting themselves as the best player in college football. Particularly the odds here, Caleb Williams obviously in first by a pretty big margin at plus 375. The next player up is Jaden Daniels from LSU at plus 1,000, followed by Quinn Ewers, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, Sam Hartman, and Drake May. Drake May is also another player I should touch on because he is just an amazing talent and did amazing things last year. And it kind of sucks that his team is bad, because if he was on a team like USC or like Georgia, he would probably get so much more recognition, win the Heisman. But North Carolina just doesn't have those elite weapons like an Ohio State or USC does. But Drake May, still a phenomenal player. Can't wait to watch him this season. Then you go down the list, you have Cade Klubnik, Jordan Travis, Michael Penix. I'm surprised Michael Penix is not higher. Same thing with Marvin Harrison Jr. Both of them at plus 1,800. I think it just goes to show, for Marvin Harrison Jr. at least, how quarterback heavy this award is. And again, with all the quarterbacks this year, I think it's going to be difficult for Marvin Harrison to win the Heisman. But I never know. But again, just so many names on here. I think he's interested to see who wins the Heisman. If I had to pick who would win the Heisman, I would go with Michael Penix. I think Washington could do some sneaky things. If he can stay healthy, I would not be surprised if Michael Penix ends up in New York. I just cannot wait for football to be back. I don't care how good the season's going to be or who's playing who, I'm just happy that football's back. And as we talked about in this video, there's just so many good teams this year, so many teams that could emerge as playoff teams, and so many teams that could also just not live up to that hype. So I'm so excited to see how this season plays out. Make sure to drop your thoughts in the comments below and let me know how you think this season's going to play out. Will Georgia get 3 in a row? Will another team emerge as the top dog? Or will it be a totally chaotic year with a bunch of upsets and crazy games all over? Make sure to drop your thoughts in the comments below and let me know. Make sure to like this video and subscribe so we can get this content out to more people who love college football. And as always, I appreciate every one of you for watching, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Peace.